The railways of the Isle of Wight have always had a special charm for those lucky enough to have the opportunity to enjoy them. For holidaymakers, the magic began at Portsmouth Harbour, from where the ferry started its voyage across the Solent to the Garden Isle. Until the late 1940s, the route was operated by a fleet of paddle steamers, built for the Southern Railway and described here by Dick Russell.
The two posh ones, they were the biggest, the Stacey and the Whippingham. Shanklin, Sandown, Ryde, Merston, Portsdown. If you had a third-class ticket, you could travel first class by payment of sixpence, and that was the first-class saloon or the upper deck, the top deck.
Yeah.
And the purser used to go around with his money bag and his ticket clipper, like a bus conductor, to collect all the tanners.
Ryde Pier stretches out from the island for nearly half a mile. From this aerial photograph, we can see the original pier and tramway to the right, the railway curving into its platforms on the left. Today, hydraulic gangways allow passengers access to the modern catamarans that now ply the Solent. At its zenith, the railway system on the island covered 55.5 miles and was served by over 30 stations and halts. Before the Southern Railway took control in 1923, there were 4 independent companies: the Isle of Wight Railway Company, the Isle of Wight Central Railway, and the Freshwater, Yarmouth and Newport. The 4th ran from the pier head to St John's and was operated jointly by the London and South Western and the London, Brighton and South Coast Railways. Most travellers to the island came through the pier head, and although the volume of passenger traffic is now a shadow of its former self, that has made surprisingly little difference to the present appearance of the station. On a summer Saturday, nearly 3,000 passengers an hour would arrive on the ferries at the pier head, in turn justifying up to 4 trains an hour being timetabled for the Ventnor Road and one for the Cowes. In 1933, the ever-increasing volume of holiday traffic persuaded the Southern Railway to enlarge the station to 4 platform faces. It survived in this form until the winter of 1967, when the layout was rationalised into the present formation. Driver Ken West recalls how the railway handled the peak of the holiday season.
And the queues on Ryde Pier Head, it was better to get off at Ryde Esplanade and join the queue to catch a boat, because if you went to Pier Head, you had to walk all the way back to get on the other end. Now today, they get one catamaran come in with about 430 people on and a 4-car train, and they get excited. See, Ryde Pier Head work on a Saturday was always worked by a turnover engine. Whenever an engine came in, same as Kay's fireworks, whenever an engine came in, a train ran in, that used to release that engine to take over another train. And those 4 trains would go by chock-a-block, like I say, during them hours, from about 7:30 in the morning to about 6:30 at night, chock-a-block all day.
Although the pier opened in 1814, it was not until 1864 that a horse-drawn tramway began to operate. In 1886, after various trials with steam locomotives, the tramway was electrified. These marvellous pictures from C.R.L. Coles show the old tram in 1927, its last year of operation. We can also see what modernisation achieved for the island's railways, as newly transferred O2 locomotives, numbered 20 and 23, clatter down the pier, each hauling a rake of old London, Chatham and Dover 4-wheel carriages. All the stock shown had been transferred within the previous 4 years. The electric cars were replaced by 2 new 4-wheeled Drury rail cars. They were matched by 2 new trailers in 1936, when the old electric trailers were at last withdrawn. The trams provided an alternative means of transport up the pier until closure overtook them in 1969. The view down the pier has changed little since this cine film was taken in 1961, though when we turn round, the scene differs considerably. The pier head signal box and the pavilion have both been demolished. Number 25 Godshill is preparing to depart, so we must board the train for the first part of our journey to Ventnor. As number 14 Fishbourne passes with what appears to be a small parcels train, we notice that the station at Ryde Esplanade was built partly on land and partly over the foreshore. This peculiar arrangement could at times cause great difficulty, either through adverse weather conditions or human error, as we now hear from Ron Russell and Ken West.
Down at the Esplanade, there was a crossover road at the Esplanade, which was used for run-round purposes. In this was controlled by an annex key, which was kept in the signal box. And the key fitted in the 6 foot, and you turn the key to release the points. And it was not unknown for this key to go down through the sleepers onto the sands underneath. And if the sea was up, you were in real trouble if you lost this handle. But the pier gang had a big magnet on a rope which you could let down, and when they dropped their tools they would pick it up with this magnet and you could retrieve. In fact, I did see them retrieve the annex key with this magnet.
You used to work your train at the pier trying to dodge the waves. That sounds daft. There's a big one coming, big one coming. You shut the regulator, see? If you, and give her a touch on the brake. Another one coming, then you probably give her a bit on the regulator to get advance of that one. But you never succeeded every time.
Today, only the up-platform awning remains from the original 1880 station. The exterior has altered beyond recognition as the bus terminal has gained in importance. Between the Esplanade and St John's, the line passes through the 391 yards of the Esplanade Tunnel. The tunnel was constructed to avoid wholesale demolition of the residential areas along the promenade, and it also dispensed with the level crossing that had been a source of aggravation to the locals ever since the tramway was extended in 1871. As the line climbs away from the tunnel, it follows the course of Monkton Mead Brook before passing the site of Ryde Gasworks and the Southern Vectis bus garage. The line then swings round to pass under St John's Road and into the station of that name. Ryde St John's, opened in 1864, was the original terminus of the Isle of Wight Railway's line from Shanklin. It was joined by the Isle of Wight Central Railway's line from Newport in 1875. At the southern end of the up platform is the only working signal box left on the British Rail section. This remarkable photograph, taken in 1926, shows the new signal box already in place, whilst the original in the background will shortly be demolished. As usual, the new box was second-hand and had originally been sited at Waterloo Junction. The railway works, situated behind the down platform, still perform miracles on today's second-hand stock. There has not been much change since Roy Way started there as long ago as 1924.
It was just after the Southern Railway had taken over the Isle of Wight railways, and I stripped all the upholstery out of the old Freshwater, Yarmouth and Newport coaches. And then there was two coach trimmers, Albert Fosbrook and Hector Holbrook, and they did these coaches up, and then they were used on the island railways.
The greater diversity of work undertaken by the Newport shed was reflected in the allocation of locomotives between Newport and Ryde. Ken West tells us which engines could be found at each shed in 1948.
Number 1 was the Medina, number 2 was Yarmouth, number 3 was Ryde, number 4 was Wroxall. That was your 4 E1s. 5, 6, 7 we never had. Number 8 was Freshwater, which was a Terrier. 9, 10, 11 was Newport, which is a Terrier, still preserved like in that mate there. 12, 13 was Carisbrook. Now Ryde engines was 14 Fishbourne, 15 Caves, 16 Ventnor, 17 Seaview, 18 Ningwood, 19 Osborne, 20 was Shanklin, 21 Sandane, 22 Bryden, 23 Totland, 24 Calbourne. Those were all Roy O2 tanks. Then he went on to Newport. You had 25 Godsall, 26 Whitwell, 27 Merston, 28 Ashey, 29 Alverson, 30 was Charles, 31 Shell, 32 Bonchurch, 33 Bembridge. Another one came at 34 and took the place of Newport, which eventually went away.
In 1949, the last two O2s were transferred to the island, numbers 35 Freshwater and 36 Carisbrooke, bringing the total number of O2 locomotives to 23. Until 1926, the Newport and Ventnor roads were treated as two single lines. During Isle of Wight and Isle of Wight Central days, racing to Smallbrook by the crews of each company was a common event.
When I was a boy, I lived in Abingdon Road, and the Isle of Wight Central and the Isle of Wight Railway used to run in St John's Road and race out to Smallbrook. And we used to stand up at the top of our road and watch them going out there, full speed ahead there, and the stuff coming out of the chimney.
3.5 miles out from Ryde St John's, we reached Brading. For 70 years, passengers could change at Brading and travel down the short branch line to St Helens and Bembridge. Trains for the Bembridge branch used the bay platform on the down side. Roy Way, a signalman at Brading for many years, tells us how the branch was worked.
Angie used to come out with the goods from St John's round about 5 o'clock in the morning. Well, then she would, if there was any coal for Brading, that was put off, and then they would go on to St Helens and shunt St Helens Quay. And then when they'd finish there, they'd go down to Bembridge and pick up their train, passenger train, to come up to Brading.
St Helens Station remains in an excellent state of preservation, even though it has not seen a train for over 40 years. Today the building is a comfortable family home, yet the railway atmosphere still lingers, and it is easy to imagine the hooter of the branch engine echoing across the marshes. Immediately upon leaving St Helens, a short siding crossed over the main road and entered St Helens Quay, which was situated on the western edge of Bembridge Harbour. Although the branch was run in a fairly relaxed manner, things could sometimes go wrong, as guard Sam Wells recalls.
I was with Ronnie Good and he was learning the job, and I said to Ron, I'll lock the gates up and you couple the brake van to the engine, which I thought Ron had done. So we were propelled to Bembridge, and I thought to myself, this van's going fairly fast. Well, there was a matter. Diddly-dee, diddly-daw, diddly-dee, and it was getting faster and faster and faster. So I walks out onto the little place where you can see, and there we were. There was the engine, miles up the track. I could just see the light. We were on our own. I said to Ron, we're on our own. Diddly-daw, diddly-dee. We go round the bend into Bembridge. I puts the handbrake on, and what happened? Being a wet morning, the wheels just picked up. The way we went, crashed into the passenger train. I managed to jump out onto the platform, and Ron was still in there. He had lamps all wrapped around his neck and all sorts there.
Sadly, in contrast to St Helens, only the goods shed remains at Bembridge to give any clue as to where the station once stood. Back at Brading, we can hear about Mad Jack Sturgis and the rivalry between the branch and mainline drivers.
And Charlie Humphreys ran on the branch line and went down to take water. And as Jack Sturgis came in with the ride train, you see, and Charlie Humphreys says, "Don't want anything to do with you mainline drivers if you can't keep time." And all the rest of that week, old Sturgis, I could hear him. It was one of these calm weeks, you know. You could hear him start out at St John's and coming right up through the Smallbrook, full bore. And of course, when he ran into the station, old Charlie Humphreys was just running into St Helens.
From Brading, the line follows the River Yar and skirts the marshes at the back of Yaverland before climbing the 1 in 77 bank that leads into Sandown. Sandown was the first of the holiday destinations, and during summer Saturdays, several of the services would terminate here. Dick Russell describes some of the difficulties the signalman could encounter.
The trains from Ryde to Ventnor, they didn't all go to Ventnor. Some terminated at Sandown and some at Shanklin, because the Sandown ones we had to run round to go back again. And of course at the same time we had the trains coming in from Newport, and they had to run round to go back to Newport Cowes again. In the normal way, the Newport train used to run into Sandown, up to the water column, take water, and run round its train without interfering with anything else, run down into Newport and back onto the train. But with 5 on, you had to uncouple, he had to go up and get his water, then come back on the train, and then when circumstances were right, he could go up into the Shanklin section and back down towards Brading and back onto his train that way.
Situated on the downside of the station was a parcels dock and a small goods yard mainly used by the local coal merchant. As number 17 Seaview and set 494 depart for Ryde, we can see how in the absence of a steam engine, muscle power was the prime mover when it came to the positioning of coal trucks. Happily, the main station building at Sandown has survived, along with its associated canopy. But unfortunately, the same cannot be said for the island platform. Both the canopy and the tall signal box have been demolished in recent years. At the southern end of the station, the small crossing has been replaced by a subway, and the points, enabling through trains to run between Ventnor and Newport, have long since been removed. As soon as trains depart from Sandown, they face a stiff 1 in 80 climb past Los Altos Park, before crossing Lake Road Bridge, and so into the newly opened Lake Station. The Isle of Wight Railway had originally opened a small halt at Lake in 1889 to serve the county cricket ground. The facility was closed in 1914, and residents of Lake had to wait until 1987 to welcome the station we see today. Situated closer to the beach than either Sandown or Shanklin, it has proved popular not only with the locals, but with the holidaymakers as well. Shanklin was the original terminus of the line from Ryde St John's and was opened in 1864. The rationalisation undertaken by British Rail in the last few years has returned the station almost exactly to its 1864 layout, with only the run-round loop missing. The up platform was constructed when the line was opened through to Ventnor in 1866, whilst the large down platform awning was extended under the management of the Southern Railway. As at Sandown, a small goods yard was provided on the downside along with a parcels dock, whilst on the upside was the 200-foot-long gas house siding serving the Shanklin Gas Company. When the line was electrified in 1967, a short length of track was retained over Langard Road Bridge to enable the electric units to cross over to the up platform. As passenger figures declined, this facility was withdrawn. Eventually, the road bridge was demolished, and now the rails stop abruptly at the end of Shanklin's remaining platform. Luckily, our journey can continue, starting with the assault on the 1 in 70 gradient of Apps Bank. The climb lasted for 1.5 miles before the line swung round the base of St Martin's Down, and so into Wroxall. The original station at Wroxall consisted of just the up platform and its associated buildings. It was not until 1925 that the down platform was added, making the station into a crossing point, and so increasing the line's capacity for the new summer service. Ron Russell recalls it during its working days.
It was quite a busy station, Wroxall, because it was in the centre of the village. And it was very convenient for the ladies with their prams. So I wanted to go to Shanklin for shopping. But the signalman there, of course, was a booking clerk as well as a signalman.
Looking towards Ventnor, the skyline is dominated by St Boniface Down, and to the crew of the down train, that meant the 1,312 yards of Ventnor Tunnel.
When you crossed at Wroxall, when you look towards Ventnor Tunnel, you could see the smoke before you got it was still coming out. Well, that tunnel would be chock-a-block. He was over 3/4 of a mile long. Well, what I'm saying is you could go through Ventnor Tunnel, and if you wasn't careful, you could come out the other end, and you'd be eating dirt up before you realised you'd gone by your own signal. Good, there's a box. The box was right outside. There's a signal stood up in the smoke.
The site chosen for Ventnor Station had to be scooped out of the chalk on the southern edge of St Boniface Down. The site was always restricted and inconveniently situated, being some 294 feet above sea level. The station's main buildings were on Platform 1, Platform 2 being a narrow island platform. The restricted site would not allow a footbridge to be constructed, so a movable bridge was used to allow passengers to gain access to Platform 2. Around the edge of the site were various caves that were used by local coal merchants. These caves and the tunnel mouth are all that remain of the station today. As Ventnor was the terminus of the 12.5-mile line from Ryde, facilities to coal and water the locomotives were installed. The coal stage fell into disuse with the arrival of the O2s, but engines could still be seen taking water and having their smoke boxes cleaned out right up to the end of passenger services in April 1966. Because the site was so restricted, any shunting manoeuvres meant that the locomotive had to pull into the tunnel. As we have already heard, the tunnel did not clear very quickly, so colour lights had to be installed. As number 33 Bembridge backs down to set 492, we can take our final glimpse of Ventnor before departing for Ryde again to start our second journey to Newport and Cowes. Smallbrook Junction was one of the most famous locations on the island. It was only switched in during the summer season and passed trains from Ryde St John's onto the single-track sections to Brading or Haven Street, dealing with up to 12 trains an hour on summer Saturdays. With a new interchange station between the Isle of Wight Steam Railway and Network South East, Smallbrook has changed beyond all recognition from the days when Dick Russell worked at the box.
It was only like a glorified hut out in the middle of nowhere. No water, no electricity, and no gas. Nothing out there really.
Today, Smallbrook marks the start of the splendid steam railway that has kept alive so much of the island's unique rolling stock and railway atmosphere. With the reopening of the line back to Smallbrook from Haven Street, Ashy has returned to the railway map. Originally opened by the Isle of Wight Central Railway in 1875, it served only a scattered rural community. However, Sir Henry Oglander lived close by, and this ensured that a lavish station was provided. What had been the mile-long Ashy racecourse siding gives us another clue as to why the station was located in such an isolated spot. The siding served both the local racecourse and the chalk quarries situated high up on the side of Ashy Downs. Decline set in before the First World War, when the chalk quarries finished working. In 1953, Ashy was reduced to the status of an unstaffed halt. The station remained occupied by a retired railwayman for some years, but by the early 1960s it had fallen into decay. Thankfully, the process has been reversed, and today both the old station building and the down platform with its small waiting shelter are in splendid condition. Haven Street was once a sleepy little station, allowing its trains to cross once an hour on the single line between Smallbrook and Newport. With its neat red brick building dating from 1926, and the booking office also playing host to the signal box, who could have imagined the activity that now takes place here? Closed in 1966, the station lay dormant until reopening by the Preservation Society took place in 1972. Since then, the Society's achievements have been outstanding. 2 new stations have been built in order that the trains can run between Smallbrook and Wootton. Several antique coach bodies have been meticulously restored to service. A well-appointed shop, together with a museum, are now housed in the old gasworks, and a new refreshment block has been built close to the original station building. None of the real character that epitomised the island railways has been lost. This cinefilm from 1973 shows how far the railway has come in the last 20 years. Who knows, perhaps in another 20 years we may once again be able to purchase a return ticket to Newport. Another remarkable piece of cinefilm taken in the 1930s shows the site of the present Wootton station. In keeping with island traditions, this station has been built up over the last few years using second-hand equipment such as the Ryde Pierhead ticket collector's hut and the signal box from Freshwater Station. It served for many years as a bus shelter. Still, we must take our leave of the steam railway and press on for Whippingham and Newport. The original site of Wootton Station was some 200 yards nearer to Newport than the new one, with part of the platform running underneath Station Road Bridge. The station closed in 1953 due to the unstable nature of the ground, and since then the cutting in which it was situated has been filled in. The station house, sporting its Isle of Wight central monogram, was at the top of the cutting and still survives in private hands. Less than a mile further on we pass Whippingham. The station has always been associated with Queen Victoria, who had her own waiting room maintained here. British Railways closed it in 1953 on economic grounds. It was over 1.5 miles from the village it was supposed to serve, and over 2 miles from the Queen's residence, Osborne House. On the last leg of the journey into Newport, the line passed through the 73 yards of Newport Tunnel and out onto the viaduct that took the line across the River Medina. The viaduct was constructed in 1875 by Campbell Johnson and Company for the Ryde and Newport Railway. Running in on the left, a similar viaduct was constructed by Vosper's for the Merston and Sandown route, which had been built by the Isle of Wight Newport Junction Railway and was opened in 1879. Both these companies were amalgamated into the Isle of Wight Central Railway in 1887. When this film was taken by Vic Mitchell in 1965, there was still a large amount of working traffic on the river. Part of the viaduct incorporated a drawbridge to allow craft to gain access to the warehouses on the east side of Newport. To open the drawbridge was a time-consuming and difficult job. The fish plates had to be unbolted and all signal wires disconnected before the operation could begin. To complicate matters further, there were no set times as the Medina is a tidal river. Even so, at the turn of the century, the bridge would have been opened several times a day. Newport Station was the hub of the island system, with lines radiating to Cowes, Freshwater, Sandown and Ryde. It was also the location of the headquarters of the Isle of Wight Central Railway and of the Freshwater, Yarmouth and Newport. In the early 1920s, the complex at Newport included locomotive repair facilities, a carriage repair and paint shop, and the largest engine shed on the island. Today, virtually all traces of the large station and its associated sidings have disappeared under the Newport bypass. Ken West recalls the links at Newport Shed.
You had what was known as the shed turns and we put it bits and pieces. And then you had your goods gang, where you worked the Raleigh goods, the Ventnor goods, Medina Wharf, which was a 24-hour job at one time in Medina Wharf, 3 8-hour shifts. And then you also had your push and pull branch. That was Vent Merston and Ventnor West. And then you had, when you worked your way up your seniority, you came up in the top gang, which was all passenger work, you see.
The main goods engines were the E1s. Number 110, recently restored on the East Somerset, gives us a good idea of what these locos must have looked like when working on the island. Prior to 1923, the island companies had a varied assortment of locomotives, including this Manning Wardle tank that was purchased by the Freshwater, Yarmouth and Newport, and perhaps more typically this Bear Peacock tank, seen shunting at Newport in 1920. In 1957, the engine shed was finally closed, and all the remaining locomotives transferred to Ryde St John's. As we leave Newport, behind number 29 Alveston, we can see to our right the large number of sidings used to store coaching stock and Marshall coal trains. On the left, a freshwater train disappears towards Honey Hill Viaduct before we collect the single-line token that allows us to proceed towards Cowes. Just under 2 miles from Newport, we reach Cement Mills Halt. The wooden platform was just long enough to accommodate a single coach. A short siding branched off to the right of the main line in order that wagon loads of chalk from Shide Pit could be taken into the works. Preceding the halt, the line crossed Mill Pond Viaduct. The structure still exists and allows pedestrians and cyclists a pleasant way to get from Newport to Cowes. The route then follows the river and passes Medina Wharf. At its peak, over 140,000 tons of coal were shipped through the wharf each year, and the railway needed some 500 wagons to complete this mammoth task. Ron Russell recalls the wharf in its final years.
Yeah, they had 3 traversing cranes there, 2 for coal and 1 for sand and ballast. And there were coal merchants at Ryde St John's, and Cowes, and Newport, and Brading, and Sandown, and Shanklin, and Ventnor.
A little further on from the wharf, situated on the outskirts of Cowes, was Smithers Lane. After 1956, it was the only level crossing to be found on the island. In a small siding located here, a single wagon load of coal was occasionally left for the local coal merchant. Mill Hill Station was less than half a mile from the terminus at Cowes and served the large residential area to the south of the main town. It was situated on a sharp left-hand curve, and at the end of the platform the track dived into the 208 yards of Mill Hill Tunnel. Today most of the station site has been built over, though the platform at the northern end still defiantly shows through. The tunnel is now in use by the local gun club. One of the busiest times for the railway was during the final evening of Cowes Week, with the annual Cowes Fireworks Night. Ken West recalls how the railway dealt with a large number of passengers.
Cowes Fireworks was a busy Cowes Firework Night, busy place. You had to try and leave Cowes. You used to have a turnover engine down there, Cowes Firework Night. You'd have a turnover engine down there, so when the train ran in, there was always an engine to be released to take the next train over. And you'd have a train distributing all parts of the Isle of Wight and Cowes, to Ryde, to Freshwater, to Ventnor. They also used to have one at Newport, because they couldn't get her in Cowes, to go to Ventnor West. And she always stood in the platform, in the carriage road at Newport.
Almost every trace of the pretty little terminus at Cowes has now disappeared under the bulldozer. The station stood at the junction of Terminus Road and Carville Lane, involving a stiff climb for passengers coming off the Red Funnel steamers. It was provided with 3 platforms, but normally only platform 1 was needed for the hourly service to Newport and Ryde. Although the station is now only a fading memory, the main street and view across the river are today remarkably similar to the scenes captured in 1965. Because the layout was so restricted at Cowes, an unusual shunting manoeuvre had to be performed in order to allow the locomotive to run round.
If you had more than 4 coaches on, you couldn't run round at Cowes. It's gravitational shunting. You used to have to knock your train up. Yeah, shove her up towards Denmark Road, and then you go down over the dummy to run round. The signal will give you the appropriate dummy to run round, but you couldn't get out back in because you were still foul. That's when the guard used to let her trickle back, and then he pulled the signal off for you to get, this is what they call gravitational shunting. Like I said, the Cowes Road was a hard road, especially the carnival times, August. You'd be running around with 5 on all day, pick a spare of a Cowes, and you'd have 6 on. Newport Carnival and Ryde, chock-a-block.
As number 26, Whitwell, sets back onto her train, we must get ready to start our 3rd journey, down the Freshwater Road through Yarmouth and Ningwood, and so back to Newport. The Freshwater, Yarmouth and Newport Railway opened to passenger traffic in 1889. At first the line was worked by the Isle of Wight Central, but a disagreement in 1913 between the companies saw the FYN acquire its own rolling stock in order to run the services between Newport and Freshwater. The station at Freshwater, the largest on the line, was conveniently situated a short walk from the town centre. At first glance, little of this station appears to remain, yet a look around the back of the garden centre that now occupies much of the site reveals the uprights from a platform lamp and the station name board. Also, a good deal of the Southern Railway concrete fencing and traces of the platform can be found hanging over the edge of the River Yar. Sadly, the main building was demolished soon after closure and was replaced by a factory manufacturing springs. In turn, this has also gone, and the site is now occupied by a supermarket. Leaving Freshwater, the line turned to the north and ran along the marshy banks of the River Yar. After half a mile, it passed over Causeway Level Crossing before running round the back of the old tide mill and into Yarmouth Station. This valuable piece of cinefilm shows number 36 Carisbrook setting back into Freshwater Station, and so enabling us to start the first part of our journey back to Newport. As we run into Yarmouth, we can see that the station has survived remarkably well. The scene would not be unfamiliar to passengers arriving on the Tourist. This popular excursion train ran between Ventnor and Freshwater and was the only named train ever to run on the island.
She'd stop at Wroxall, she'd stop at Shanklin, she'd stop at Sanding, and then she would run fast to Newport. But invariably, we would cross a train at Merston if the other train was there first, and then you had the right of way right through, so that obviously then you never stopped, you see. And then when you got to Newport, the goods engine would come off, but you'd work the goods within the morning and the first part of the tourist back. When an O2 tank, like 24 and the bigger engines, Adams tanks, they would take over, and then a train which then ran fast to Yarmouth and Freshwater.
Ningwood, with its small 9-lever signal box, was for many years the only passing loop on the line. The station house, upside waiting shelter, and both platforms all remain intact and have today been converted into an attractive private residence. On from Ningwood, close to the village of Newbridge, the line crossed Calburn Viaduct, built over a tributary of the Newtown River. Half a mile further on, and some 6 miles out of Freshwater, the line entered Calbourne and Shalfleet Station. As with Ningwood, the station was rather remote from the villages it was supposed to serve. Its main source of revenue came from milk traffic and the occasional loaded wagon from the local brickworks. The station was a curious mixture of styles, with a small station house supplemented in Southern Railway days by the old corrugated iron booking office from Newport. The scene today is remarkably similar, with the platform still in place and a modern bungalow occupying the site of the original station building. Watchingwell started life as a private halt for Sir John Barrington Simeon, MP for Southampton. For many years, the station did not appear in the public timetable, though even when open to the public, it was so remote that it could not have generated much in the way of passenger receipts. Today, the only way to gain access to it is by driving down the old track bed. Even then, the station site could easily be missed, as the small but beautifully kept building nestles behind a screen of thick bushes. Much of the station's railway character has been carefully retained by the present owner. On a long, hot summer's day, it is easy to imagine waiting for the tourist to rush through the station on its way back to Ventnor. Carisbrook Station was situated in the shadow of its more famous neighbour, Carisbrook Castle. Originally, it was provided with a passing loop, and the remains of the up platform and track bed are just visible on the left of this photograph. Today, only the curve of the school playing field shows where the station once stood. From Carisbrook, the line gently rolled downhill, passing over Petticoat Lane level crossing and the viaduct at the bottom of Honey Hill. The viaduct was the most impressive structure on the whole line and was built on 9 concrete arches lined with brick and 19 wrought iron spans. Nothing remains of the metal part of the viaduct, though some of the brick arches are still in place. At its foot stands a small corrugated iron hut that served for many years as the headquarters of the Freshwater, Yarmouth and Newport Railway. As the trains came off the viaduct, they passed through the goods yard and the site of the company's Newport station. As a result of the 1913 dispute, the Isle of Wight Central prohibited the freshwater trains from running into the main station. This caused considerable inconvenience to passengers who now faced a long walk between the two stations. The temporary station stayed in use until the summer of 1923. Curiously, although the route closed as early as 1953, it is the remains of the freshwater line that today provide the only tangible reminders of Newport's railway history. The fourth line out of Newport headed south, following the shallow valley of the River Medina as far as Blackwater, before turning east into the Vale of Arraton and proceeding to Merston Junction. We are fortunate in having this rare piece of cinefilm showing a train arriving from Merston in 1953. The routes to Ryde and Merston ran as two single lines over the River Medina. Once over the drawbridge, the Ryde line swings to the left, the Merston line to the right. The latter then passed over the lengthy Coppins Bridge on its way to Pan Lane Crossing. Coppins Bridge was dismantled in 1960, and today the whole area has been transformed into a large roundabout at the foot of the Newport bypass. The first station on the line was at Shide, just under a mile from Newport. At the back of the station were the large pits which provided cement mills on the Cowes line with chalk, and the railway with large quantities of ballast. Since closure in 1956, the River Medina has been rerouted to follow the old track bed, and today it is difficult to believe that the railway ever ran through Shide. The level crossing over Shide Road was situated where the modern road bridge crosses the river. Shide was made a key token block post in order to break up the long section from Merston to Newport South. To this end, a small 9-lever signal box was situated on the platform. Blackwater is situated at the foot of St George's Down, and like other stations on the line, served only a very scattered rural community. The platform we can see here was the original one, made from timber. It was later rebuilt by the Southern Railway. At the southern end of the platform was the station house, which also served as a ticket office, and the level crossing gates controlling the main Newport to Shanklin Road. Much of the station has survived, including the platform and the station house. An extension has been skillfully added to the house over the course of the track bed, and only the slight change in the colour of the roof tiles give any clue to the careful observer. Merston is situated at the point where the Yar runs out onto the floor of the Vale of Arraton. From 1875 until 1897, it was a small intermediate station on the Newport to Sandown line. But with the opening of the branch south to Godshill and ultimately Ventnor west, it became not only a junction, but also a crossing point for trains on the main line. All the station buildings have long since been demolished, yet the platform remains hidden amongst the choking weeds. Despite the isolated nature of the station, Merston Signal Box was the only one on the island to have the luxury of wheel-operated level crossing gates. The Ventnor West branch had the dubious distinction of being the last line to open on the island, and unfortunately the first one to close. Opened throughout in 1900, it could only manage a working life of 52 years. Godshill was the first stop on the line, and the station was built half a mile to the west of the village, in the shadow of Bleak Down, and close to the strangely named hamlets of Beacon Alley and Bagwich. The substantial nature of the station buildings on the branch reflected the optimism of the promoters. By 1927, however, when Godshill was downgraded to an unstaffed halt, little optimism could have been left. The only regular source of income generated by the area was the milk traffic, and perhaps it is appropriate that today the station building is in use as a farmhouse. After Godshill, Stenbury down to the east and St Catherine's down to the west begin to tower over the line as we approach Whitwell station. It served not only its own village, but the area around Knighton, Chale and Blackgang. For some years it had the distinction of possessing the line's only passing loop. Southern Railway economies prevailed in 1926, and the loop, along with the signal box, were taken out of use. On from Whitwell, the line continued to climb until it crossed over Dean Level Crossing and then plunged into the 619 yards of St Lawrence Tunnel. Ken West recalls what it was like to work this part of the branch. Then we too can board the footplate of a terrier and take the ride through the tunnel before sweeping out onto the ledge with its breathtaking views.
And then from Woodall you used to go on up through Dean, up through Cutton, picturesque Cutton, beautiful it was. Going up through to Dean Crossing, and then you go through St Lawrence Tunnel, and when you come out of St Lawrence Tunnel, you really can't describe it, because you come in on a ledge and there was always a speed restriction there. When I say ledge, you wouldn't come in on a, not walking a plank sort of, as you know, you had a, you know what I mean. Left you had St Boniface down up there, and then over this side you had Ventnor Town, or Ventnor West Town it was known, plus the sea, and it was really beautiful. And you go on down through there, down through the St Lawrence, and leave St Lawrence on in the Ventnor West.
St Lawrence Station, 5.5 miles from Merston, was the temporary terminus of the line from 1897 until 1900. Although the track bed has been filled in and the large station house has had a small extension added on the platform side, the whole area has changed very little since it saw its last train in 1952. The line continued to descend for the last leg of the journey until arrival at Ventnor West, 6.5 miles from Merston. The station was provided with 2 platforms, though platform 2 on the left of this photograph saw very little use. Comparison with the view today reveals the track bed now in use as Castle Close, and surrounded by modern housing there stands the original station building. It used to be equipped with a refreshment room and a 13-lever signal box, usually switched out. With the introduction of a push-pull set on the branch in 1924 and the economy of a conductor guard issuing tickets, Ventnor West became the last station on the line to be manned. Back at Merston, we leave behind number 33 Bembridge for the last part of the journey to Sandown. As the line swung away from the branch, it started to descend Redway Bank. The bank lasted for the next 1.75 miles as far as Horringford Station. Situated next to the main Newport to Sandown road, the station must have been a busy place in its early days. However, by the time Sam Wells was captured on film, most of the passengers had transferred to the buses. The station was still manned, however, and Dick Russell recalls how difficult it could be to light the platform lamps.
It was the biggest of a job in the high wind trying to light those platform lamps. Yeah. And I remember on one occasion we had a nasty letter from the stores to say that we've been using far too many matches. And I was you get blown a girl up a ladder trying to light the oil lamps. Yeah. And they complain you're using too many matches. They're only about a penny a box anyway.
Immediately before Newchurch Station, the line crossed over the road leading up to the pretty little village. The station was manned for many years by Vic Hales, whom we could see working the level crossing gates, and Roy Way, who appears in these photographs. The wooden platform was rebuilt by the Southern Railway, but sadly today only a short piece of this concrete platform remains, incorporated into a rockery. Certainly a change from the days when Roy and Dick handled the flower traffic for Covent Garden.
The most we ever had was 56 bundles of boxes. And when we loaded them up into the train to go to Sandown to be taken out and put on the other train, the guard just had enough room to stand up in his van.
Yeah. When I was at Elverston, the chap at Newchurch would ring me up sometimes to say, have you got a pram to get on this train? And if there was, they had to leave some of the flowers out to leave room for a pram to get in. But if it was just passengers, of course, they could get in the compartments.
From Ulverston, the line crossed over 2 minor roads and climbed a short bank into Sandown Station. There, a short length of the line still curves away towards Ulverston, and an old branch platform remains in use as an engineer's siding. With the steady closure of lines during the 1950s and 60s, and the transfer to electric trains in 1967, many thought that it was just a matter of time before the island's railways disappeared completely. Thankfully, through the marvellous efforts of the Isle of Wight Steam Railway and the pride of the railwaymen on the remaining section between Ryde and Shanklin, the railways have not only clung on, but prospered as well. How different to that last sad day in 1966, preserved by our last piece of cinefilm shot by Ken Groundwater. Perhaps it can serve as a token of our respect for the generations of railwaymen who have contributed so much to the romance of the railways on England's Garden Isle.